I've had a real fascination with sport for a long time, and I think there's something about the intensity of engagement with an activity that really attracts me, and not just the experience of the sportsman or sportswoman engaged in the activity of playing sport, being in a match, being in a competition, but also the activity of looking at sport. So being a spectator, but also the technology around capturing images of sport and what those technologies can kind of reveal or open up about those activities.
The collaborative process between Dryden and myself started with a lot of discussion about my practice as a dance scientist and also Dryden's practice as an artist. My research focus is on flow theory, which is a theory that's focused on observing and collecting information about people's experiences of being in the zone. Most of my research has been focused on dancers, but also that's extending out now with populations such as divers. Obviously in science we're primarily concerned with capturing empirical data, and as an artist Dryden isn't bound by that at all.
So conversations with Elsa really focused on the central activity of the diver and the build up to the dive, and that sense of shifting into a sort of a different state. I really liked in our conversations that she would be very conscious and would pull the conversation often back to the rational and the quantifiable within the diving experience, and how her work would need to have this scientific rigour with it. And I like this sort of relationship between the ideas of a scientific rigour and the ideas of artistic rigour, and how they can share a lot of things, but the onus is somehow different. Kind of have periods of silence where we would just observe, and then we would discuss what we saw. And the things that were really significant to me was the kind of the spatial layout of how the diving board and where the sort of different relationships between the coach and the divers, and then the interaction between the divers themselves, the kind of camaraderie that would spring up. But then this kind of interior space of the individual divers.
Once our conversations had developed a little bit, we started to be really interested in how the divers prepare to be in the zone. So the antecedents or the facilitators of getting into the zone, into this flow-like state, where they can access really optimal experiences of diving. So they would scoop the hands quite close to the legs, a narrowing of the focus as they stepped onto the diving board, stretching the tops of their feet to really extend the feet as they point, wiping the drips of water from a previous dive before commencing the next dive. And those experiences, so that the facilitators of those might be positive, but equally there may be impacts which are negative too. So we were interested in observing that, and what art perhaps can bring to that is capturing the more lived experience, the emotional experience that people have in their day-to-day lives, in this case in the divers' lives, and bringing about a more holistic understanding of that lived experience.
What I got really interested in, and what sort of guided me through was everything around the dive, and how when you capture those activities, whether it's in the stretching and the warming up process, so very kind of close crops of details of that. The image of one of the young divers on the edge of the board, and how they disappear out of the frame, and how the camera is left just running into this empty space. There's something about the suggestive and evocative quality of those images which come from the specifics of this situation and the activity of diving, but also take you somewhere else, that they suggest other things. At the moment that they get on the board, you might be looking at a detail of a foot, and the kind of the sort of charge and spasm of energy that kind of sort of rips through the body, and then as they leap, it almost seems to be coming from elsewhere. You know, it seems to be they kind of evolving. All these, this idea of poised between states, and in all senses of the word. But these little details about, you know, increasing the tuck to increase the velocity of the spin, or kind of holding the body further back to slow that down. That would just go on and on and on and on. And this sort of dedication, the kind of this tension, I think, through the whole film experience for making the film, to me, has been between the sort of the kind of the pedantic, repetitious, fragmentary analysis and practicing of these different parts of the dive, and then how they form into this kind of cohesive whole. So this kind of quite prosaic aspect set against what seems to me an incredibly highly charged and emotional at times response to looking at the images of these individuals engage in these sort of quite extreme activities, which seems to sort of open up a kind of insights to me into kind of sort of fundaments of being human beings, and I like that contained in these activities where they're really trying to push the limits and also trying to achieve something that is not just carved within the momentary, but also carved within the repetitious activities for weeks and months beforehand, that actually it sort of reveals all these other things.
Trying to not put my own bias on what I was looking at as a scientist, watching, observing the details, but also backing that up with interviews with the participants, with the divers themselves, to try and understand whether what they perceived was indeed what I was observing. And what's exciting about what Dryden has produced is he's observing the very same things that the divers talk about, and that's presented in a very poetic kind of way through the footage.